Thank you for joining us bright and early on this lovely Monday morning. We're really happy to have our lovely Shirley Bond, MLA for Prince George Valemount here to have a little chat with us about some issues facing our region and our community these days, and doing a little FaceTime with us. We're pretty excited that she's here. And yeah, I just want to thank all of you for coming and thank the Legion for putting on such a wonderful breakfast, and everybody enjoy.
Tanya may not have needed it this short, but I do, so I'll be lowering it, and that way you can actually see me. Well, I want to reiterate Tanya's welcome this morning. It is very impressive to see this many people out on a Monday morning in August, and especially at 7:30 in the morning. Tanya and I were talking about what it's like to suddenly have to set that alarm again and realize that Bill and I got up at 6 this morning, and it's been a little while since we've had to do that. I still keep office hours all through the summer, but this was a bit earlier start than normal. I also want to thank the Legion. I want to thank Tanya and Marie, first of all, for contacting me and saying, we'd love to hear from you. Do you think you could come and do breakfast? So I want to thank them both because they were right on it and set it all up and took care of it, and basically my job was just to show up. So thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Marie. It was really, really impressive. And obviously to the Legion and Pete and Marie and others that are here, I've spent a lot of time in this Legion, and I tell everyone that I think this is one of the best run, most active of the ones that I've been in. That's because we have passionate leadership and people who really care about veterans and about the Legion, and making sure that places like the Legion continue to exist. So thank you very much, Pete, for your leadership, and Marie for pancake and egg cooking, and whoever helped with the breakfast. We really appreciate you doing that for us this morning. So I do want to recognize that we have, I think the entire village council is here this morning. Is anyone missing? One is missing. Well, that's understandable. It's holiday in August and all of those things. But I want to extend a personal thank you to the people who have run for public office in your community. As a member of the Legislative Assembly, I am very lucky to work with councils in 3 communities. And I just want to recognize the very proactive work that the Village of Valemount does. And I get to see what lots of communities do, and how they operate, and how they do their work. And I just want to thank the Mayor and Council for, first of all, being so constructive in their relationships with not just me, and now as a member of the opposition, but also working with government and the elected leaders that lead our province. So congratulations to all of you. I know that a new electoral cycle is on its way, and who knows, there could be lots of exciting opportunities, but I did want to express my personal thank you to them for their relationship. They never hesitate to call me and say, you need to get on this, or could you help us with this, or here's some information. So I want to say an enormous thank you. They've become very good friends, and I appreciate all of them. So what I thought I'd do today is I don't want to take all of the time having a one-way conversation, and I certainly hope, and I'm sure there will be some questions or things you may want to say to me as I do my work in Victoria, but I did want to cover a few topics that probably are going to have an impact on the areas that I represent. And I'll start with the fact that I will not make light of the fact that it has been a significant adjustment for me over the last year. As you can imagine, having been part of government for 17 years, and having a cabinet position for all of those years, which by the way is fairly unprecedented. There are only a few of us in British Columbia that have had that opportunity. Moving to the opposition benches was certainly a change. And one of the biggest things that I worried about was, how can I influence policy decisions? How can I support my constituents when I can't just call up another minister and say, hey, get this fixed, which many of you know is my reputation in Victoria. And I would admit that it has been very different in terms of how we get things done. But I know that some of you know that I made a conscious decision to try to work across party lines on issues of importance to, especially those of you here in Valemount. But for me, what mattered most was how do I advance initiatives on behalf of my constituents when I'm on the opposition bench? And so I did work, as you have probably seen or heard, with Andrew Weaver, the leader of the Green Party, and I have a fair degree of a positive working relationship with many NDP cabinet ministers, having been in the legislature with them for a long time. And I have come to the very pragmatic place in my career that what matters most is serving you. And if that means working across party lines, then that's an important thing to contemplate. It doesn't mean changing principles or things that I believe in, but it does mean finding ways to get work done. I think you've seen that with Borealis Geothermal. It really took both Andrew Weaver and I to get the attention of the minister in terms of moving that project forward, and I think we're in a good place. There's more work to be done, but we certainly raised the issue in the legislature together. We would follow one another and basically tag team on the questions and getting attention for that issue. The same thing is true of Valemount Glacier. As you can imagine, it is incredibly important that we get that project across the line. And one of the things that mattered, I was grateful that we got the majority of the permitting and all of those things taken care of before a change in government. But I can tell you that all three parties know and understand the importance of that project to this part of the province and to the province more broadly. So those are the kinds of things that I think, it's not always easy, and we agree to disagree on many files, but I think where there is room for cooperation, we need to find ways to do that. That's the way you're going to get things done when you're in opposition. So I wanted to highlight a few policy issues, though, that I think will have the potential to impact the Robson Valley and also British Columbia generally. And you will not be surprised to hear, I am a strong believer in free enterprise. I believe in a strong and growing economy. I believe that you have to encourage private sector growth. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing as a province and contemplating public projects, but I am a very strong believer that if you want to have a prosperous British Columbia, you need a strong and vibrant private sector. So some of the areas where I've had significant concern with policy decisions of the current government, in particular, are related to the tax burden that small business are going to face in the province and individuals like you and I. When you look at the number of tax increases that we are facing, they are significant. And you don't have to look much farther than the employer health tax. And many of you may not know about that, but if you are a small business owner or if you are operating a municipality in British Columbia, you're going to know. Now, I certainly agree that it was time to deal with MSP premiums, and we had decided that we were going to eliminate half of the MSP premiums and do a complete elimination when the province could afford to pay for it, because you have to find that lost revenue somewhere. And what happened, which was a surprise to British Columbians, and this isn't a political statement, it's simply fact, is that in order to eliminate the MSP premiums completely, the government created a tax called the employer health tax. And what it meant was that business owners, employers, are now responsible for generating the revenue through a tax that would have been paid through MSP premiums. So in fact, what's happened, it's a replacement tax for MSP premiums. Our biggest concern were organizations like school districts, municipalities, who are now on the hook for paying the employer health tax, as are municipalities. Charities were also included. My office was full of nonprofit organizations saying, how on earth are we suddenly going to pay an employer health tax, because they hadn't been responsible for MSP premiums previously. So we worked very hard in the legislature, and I am one of the co-finance critics for the opposition. We were relentless on that topic, And just recently, we've seen an adjustment to that employer health tax, where some of the rules have changed. The government is now going to provide $90 million back to organizations like school districts, universities, hospitals. But I can assure you $90 million will not cover the entire bill. When you look at school districts alone, their portion of that employer health tax is likely about $75 million. So there are still people who are going to be paying for that employer health tax who had no idea that that was going to happen to them. So on one hand, you eliminate the MSP premiums, but you transfer that tax burden through employers to regain that revenue. So that is a significant concern for me. Municipalities at this point have been provided no relief. So what will happen, and I'm assuming at the Union of BC Municipalities meetings that will happen shortly, this will become an issue, because the only way for municipalities to recover what they will be required to spend on the employer health tax is by property taxes. So in other words, it's coming right back to you through a property tax increase, because they have no choice. But they are going to be the bearers of bad news, because they have not been given any relief. Charities have been given some relief, which we are very grateful for. There has been, as I said, a $90 million fund created to send money back to those other organizations. So that was an enormous concern for me. And as I said, we spent a lot of time in the legislature asking hard questions about that to Carol James, the finance minister. And again, I have a good working relationship with her, but my job is to ask her hard questions. And there were moments in the legislature where that got a little testy, because I have a very, very capable partner in Tracy Reddy's, and together we held the government to account on that file. It's not the only tax that I'm concerned about. There's a tax called the speculation tax. Now, I am not opposed to a speculation tax. We need to reduce speculation and to try to look at the issue of housing affordability. But the issue is the definition of this tax. We ended up calling it the cabin tax, because essentially if you have a second property, you are going to be impacted by the speculation tax. And we were assured by the Premier that British Columbians would not be impacted. Well, when we did our homework, we actually found out that the majority of people being impacted by the speculation tax are actually British Columbians with a second home. And these aren't people who simply own, giant properties in Shaughnessy. These are people who may have inherited a cabin from a family, through a family situation. So the speculation tax is really anything but. And that is something we need to be concerned about here in Valemount. And you can imagine why. We are next door neighbors to Alberta. And if we have developers that want to come here and build houses or subdivisions or invest in Valemount, we are basically saying to Albertans, if you come here, your tax rates will be higher because you're coming to buy a property in British Columbia. And that has had a very chilling impact on projects across the province. We've seen major projects stopped in Kelowna and in the Kootenays, where we rely on other Canadians to be able to come and participate in the economy of British Columbia. So I am not opposed to a speculation tax that is defined as a speculation tax properly. Do I think it should be taxing British Columbians who have a cabin? No, I do not. And again, we ask the government to clarify those issues. Currently, the speculation tax is applied geographically in very specific areas, and many other communities have asked for exemptions. So again, this is an issue that I've discussed with Mayor and Council, and in fact a developer that was concerned about properties here in Valemount. So those are things that are on our current radar screen, and we'll be continuing to look at the legislation that is brought forward. There are two pieces of legislation related to these taxes that will come to the House in the fall. Trans Mountain and the Kinder Morgan process. Again, I have been asked by many of you, and I've certainly been very clear about my view of that when asked in electoral debates and in campaigns. And I am a supporter of sustainable and responsible resource development, and that does include the Trans Mountain project. I am very disappointed that this has turned into a taxpayer-supported project. There was a private sector company that is willing to build that pipeline. And because of the approach that our current government has taken, that has now turned into basically a national debate and a national project funded by taxpayers in Canada. And I don't think that was necessary. I think that with appropriate guidelines in place, with all of the necessary safety precautions taken both on water and on land, that I think that private sector company would have been able to move forward with the project without taxpayer support. Now, if you think that's the only project that will be impacted by the climate in British Columbia, we would be wrong about that. The biggest concern I have about the current approach, which is pretty much no to most forms of responsible, sustainable development, and I understand there are people with different views, and you know, that's natural. There are going to be people who are supportive of those projects and people who are opposed. My job is to make sure that the proper safety precautions are in place to look at responsible development. British Columbia has been blessed with natural resources. We need to figure out how to use them properly. But the biggest message we are sending to investors right now is don't come to British Columbia. Because if you can't get a project approved, if you cannot work in British Columbia in the way that you need to as a private sector developer, guess what they're going to do? Capital is mobile. It will choose to go somewhere else. And so while the economy today is in relatively healthy shape, that isn't necessarily going to be the case. And we have to find a way to continue to generate revenue and grow the economy in British Columbia. So work, I know, will be starting shortly here in the Valemount area. And I am the last person to suggest that it is the only thing we should be looking at in terms of economic development. It is a short-term project that brings benefits to the community, but of course we need to be looking at diversification, things like the tourism sector, geothermal, the resort, all of those things. But the Trans Mountain project does play an important role in British Columbia. I want to talk about the tourism hotel tax for a minute. So I tried to pick out issues that I thought would have the most direct impact on the Robson Valley. Those probably many of you in the tourism sector would know that there is a hotel tax that is charged when we stay in hotels in communities in British Columbia that have agreed to collect a tax. Now the process involves asking hoteliers, and you have to get a majority of support in order to be allowed to collect that tax. And that can be an arduous process. There are communities in British Columbia where the hotel tax is not collected because they can't get a majority of hoteliers to actually support collecting the tax. But that tax is collected for tourism marketing. And hoteliers, once they agree, it's on the bill, at the bottom of your bill, and that money goes back to the community to use for tourism marketing. And I support that. I think the process is rigorous. When you get approval, you get to go out and you collect the tax. And tourism is incredibly competitive. When you look at the markets we're competing with to try to attract people, you have to have a significant tourism marketing budget. So we discovered in a little tiny line in a government document that the government was contemplating allowing municipalities to use those funds for other purposes. And one of the purposes suggested was to invest in affordable housing. Now, I agree we need to look at affordable housing and we need to look at it all across British Columbia, but do I think that hoteliers who've agreed to collect a tax based on the fact it would be used for tourism marketing are going to like the idea of seeing that money being diverted to other projects? Now, nothing says it will happen, but opening that door to a discussion about how to use that money, in my view, if I'm a hotelier, what do I do next time around when the reapproval is required? You simply say, sorry, I'm not collecting a tax that's going to go to affordable housing. And so once again, what do? You diminish the capacity of the tourism sector to attract people to British Columbia and to our region. So very concerned about that. I spoke in the legislature about it on behalf of this riding in particular. We need those dollars to stay focused on tourism marketing, especially with the resort coming and with the assets we have here, the ancient forest, Mount Robson, all of those things. We want to attract more visitors. And if we can get them to stay overnight for one night, that generates revenue for the local economy. So we're worried about that. At this point, the government has not been willing to look at that and close what we see as a slippery slope. But we'll continue to have that on our radar screen, and it's something I think you need to be thinking about as well. The community benefits agreement the government just signed may have less impact for us here, but it will have potentially a broader impact. So the government recently signed an agreement that it's a new labor framework, and it now has determined that for any public infrastructure projects, so if you're building a bridge in the Lower Mainland, which they're building a fair number of, workers on those projects will need to join a specific trade union. So if you want to work on a project that the government is building, you will need to join a specific union. Now, I can tell you, I fully respect the work that unions do and have done in the history of our province, and I am grateful. Our family was raised on a union salary, so I am not by nature an anti-union person. It's not about that. It's about a specific union. And do you know that today in British Columbia, 85% of the workers on projects in this province do not belong to the specified unions? And it means that they have to, in order to work, they have to belong to that trade union. They have to within 30 days of working on that project, sign up and start paying union dues. And I just think that in a province like British Columbia, while I understand and appreciate the importance of trade unions, I think people should have some choice. And what that means is if you are not a member of those unions, your company, your workforce will be excluded from those projects. And if you think about what that means, it all comes back to increasing cost. Those projects will cost more money. So right now, it's expected that with the projects that are on the books at the moment, and who knows, I mean, we'll see how they're managed. This was done in the Island Highway when the previous government was in power. But there is an anticipation that it could be up to $4.8 billion more expensive. So again, I want you to hear the right message from me. This isn't about being anti-union. This is about being pro-efficiency, pro-inclusive construction workforces in our province. And as I said, at this point in time, 80 to 85% of the workers in British Columbia do not belong to the specified union. They're going to create they're actually going to create a crown corporation that will become the hiring hall. And so all of the workforce will need to go through that hiring hall. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's British Columbia Infrastructure Benefits or something like that corporation. So big changes on the horizon, and time will tell whether or not it generates additional spending and how the workforces in British Columbia respond to that. I have been inundated with emails from workers and employers across my region about this issue. Basically saying, I am a worker, I don't want to join that union, why should I be forced to in order to work on projects in British Columbia? So, it's a different philosophy, it's a different way of building in British Columbia, and we'll see, what the impacts of that are. A couple more things, and then I want to hopefully get a chance to answer some questions from all of you. There's lists and lists of things we could be talking about, but one that I know that may be a bit of it may not be your highest priority at the moment, but it is of deep concern to me, and that is the approach to species at risk in British Columbia. And at the moment, the federal government has determined that the is looking at the mountain caribou strategy in particular, and of most concern is the southern mountain caribou herd. And not long ago, the federal government has deemed that they are likely going to look at an emergency order related to this particular herd. And the challenge we face is that it appears at this point, and again, I'm going to be asking Minister Sohi, who is in Prince George on Friday, this specific question, but it appears that there is a shift from looking at preservation of the herd and restoration, and all of us agree that we do need to look at species at risk. And so again, this isn't about, I don't care about mountain caribou, I do care. But it looks like there may well be a shift in thinking about the protection of habitat, expanded habitat protection, and less focus on the actual herd. So what that means is this order that we've had a look at, and I have met with heliski companies and tourism operators in my region who are extremely concerned about this. Because as you can imagine, as you expand the protection of habitat, the activities on the land base will be restricted. And candidly, it won't matter if there are mountain caribou in that region at the moment or if they've ever been there. It's if there is a possibility they will be in that region. And this, we're not talking about just let's shut down mining or shut down forestry. We are talking about recreational use. I am very concerned about it. I talked to Curtis about it earlier. From the perspective of Varda, the bike parks that we are developing, the networks, the usage on the land base, all of that could be impacted. And the question at the moment is, we just don't know what it looks like. But if an emergency order is put in place, I've had a look at the suggested map, and it extends far beyond the boundaries that mountain caribou have been protected under before. And as Curtis reminded me this morning, there are already areas that are shut for public use and for other use. This could simply extend the use, the lack of use to those areas as well. So that needs to be on our radar screen. We all support a sustainable, responsible recovery program for species at risk. And in fact, the heliski companies that I've met with say, we're willing to work with the government, we'll be flexible. Let's close areas when we need to, let's open other areas. Let's build some flexibility into this, and we're willing to work with the federal and provincial governments. To date, there's been no confirmation of a significant consultation about the impacts of that potential shift to habitat protection. So we need to keep an eye on that, and it's something that I have written to the minister directly about. I've spoken to the provincial ministers, and I'm going to bring that issue to the attention of the federal minister with a written question. I get to give a written question on Friday when Minister Sohi is in Prince George. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. And my last issue, I have a couple of little short snappers that I want to just bring to your attention, but the last substantive issue that I want to bring to your attention is one that probably as a person who's been elected for just about 2 decades of her life. Prior to that, I was a school board trustee and was the liaison representative for the Robson Valley. So I have deep connections to this valley and to you and to the people I represent. I have to tell you that I am incredibly concerned about the referendum on proportional representation. And today I want to ask you to get involved. And in essence, it's not my job to tell you how to vote, and there are differing views. I will tell you how we got to the place of having a referendum in October and November. It's part of the agreement that was signed between the Green Party and the NDP. One of the key pieces of that agreement was going to a referendum on electoral reform by the fall. Now, I personally believe that the process that has developed has been flawed. And there are many in British Columbia who would agree with me. In fact, there are court challenges underway related to the constitutionality of the whole process. But I'm not going to rely on the courts to make those decisions. I have to ask all of you to figure out what you're going to do when that voting package arrives in your mailbox. And I fully respect the fact that if you think change is important and you're going to vote yes, then you will make that decision. But I am asking you to please get involved and engaged. I'm asking perhaps the chamber, maybe the newspapers that are here today, to host forums, to get information, to start having people talk about what the options are. Because you see, between now and October 22nd, you're going to be facing municipal election news. Ironically, the ballots for the referendum will arrive in your mailbox between October 22nd, right after the municipal elections, up until the end of November. And I have been speaking in various parts of the province about proportional representation, and I can tell you what, it's on the radar screen of about this many people at the moment. No one is paying attention. But I hope you'll allow me to give you my perspective, and then I'm going to ask you to go get engaged and figure out what you're going to do about this. I know personally how hard it is, and so does everyone who's been elected here to speak to elected officials that live in Victoria and beyond. I know how hard it is to have our voice heard. So when I contemplate that my riding, which is currently, by the way, you should know this, the size of Belgium, could double in size, I'm worried about that. And for anyone who would tell you that somehow you're going to have better representation, more meaningful representation, I would argue that. Because first of all, the geography alone, I think most of you have a healthy respect for the fact that I try to spend as much time in the Robson Valley as I possibly can. First of all, because I love it. I love the people that live here, and it's part of my job. But if I'm representing Smithers, Mackenzie, Prince George, Valemount, and who knows what else, how on earth can I get to know the issues, the people, the heartbeat of those communities? Anyone who tries to tell you that it'll be easy has never done the job. Not only that, you may not, and I'm not, people say, oh, this is all about fear-mongering. No, actually, let's look at the models that are going to be on the question, on the ballot. There is a possibility that MLAs will be selected in British Columbia, not by you. Because the models that are on that ballot leave the opportunity for there to be things called party lists. And party lists mean that the parties in British Columbia will put names on a list. They will be ranked. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And based on proportionality and the system that's chosen, that person could be your MLA and you will never have put an X beside their name. Now, I know what it's like to put my name on a ballot, and I know what it's like to earn the respect to get people to put the X there. I don't think it's right that there should be party lists and that people should choose your MLA for you. But it's going to be up to you. There will be 2 questions on the ballot. The first one is, are you in favor of retaining the current first past the post system, or it'll be the form has actually been determined. And if you vote no, then obviously I would assume you wouldn't go ahead and fill out question 2, but that's really not clear either. Because question 2 is, rank the models you'd like to have. And there are 3 of them. And by the way, 2 of them have never been used anywhere in the world before. We are basically an electoral experiment at that point. So I have very strong feelings about this, and it's because it's rooted in practice. It's rooted in the fact that I have done this job for 17 years, and I know how hard it is to understand, to represent, to actually hear from people who live in especially small rural and northern communities. Now, I'm not going to take hours to try to explain to you the 3 models. And in all honesty, I've done a lot of reading. There's lots to read, and I can't explain them as effectively as I should be able to. Doesn't that tell you something? So, the package will arrive in the mail. You'll be asked to fill it out. You'll be asked to return it. And here's my biggest concern. There are no thresholds. None. What that means, previous referendum, there has been a higher threshold so that all British Columbians' votes count in this referendum. That has been removed. It is 50% plus one of the ridings and of the number of people that send in their ballot. So let's say British Columbians think, okay, what's this? I don't really need to send in my ballot. I don't even know what they're talking about. Whoop, and out it goes. It means, and I asked the Attorney General, David Eby, this question directly. So if 15, I forget what percent I used. I think I might have even gotten down to 10%. So if 10% of the voters in British Columbia show up or send in their ballots, is that a valid outcome? So 50% plus one of 10% of British Columbians. And the answer was yes. There are no thresholds. And if you think about the geography, and I put this directly to Premier Horgan in his estimates process, Vancouver and Victoria, if you add up the population, they can swamp any outcome, any of the votes that we cast here in northern British Columbia, and I'm including the broader part of northern BC. That worries me. I think it's wrong. I think it should have, and I am the first to admit, if we need another referendum, then at least do it properly. Do it with thresholds. Allow people to be engaged in the process, and most importantly, allow a citizens panel, or at least a nonpartisan group of people to create the question. That's not what happened here. The questions were approved by the Cabinet of British Columbia. So what we asked for, I spoke. I was one of 3 people chosen to speak in the emergency debate about this, which, by the way, was limited to 1 hour in the legislature on something of this magnitude. I spoke and I said, if we're going to have a referendum, what's the rush? Get it right. Make sure that the proper thresholds are in place. Make sure that it's an independent process when the question is created. And make sure there are thresholds so that all of our voices are heard. And the government refused to, they heard the debate and moved on. So I have to believe that the compelling reason for the referendum and the rush is the deal that was made between the NDP and the Green Party. In my view, I can only hope that you will take the time that is necessary to get engaged, to read about the models. There are 2 funded organizations that are speaking to the yes and the no. The government's provided $1 million, $500,000 to the yes organization and $500,000 to the no organization. And their job is to get information out to help you make your decision. So, lest anyone misunderstand, I'm not here today to tell you how to vote, because I take voting, especially standing in this place, as an enormous privilege. But I am urging you to find ways to get informed. I hope the community will find people to speak on the yes and no side, have forums between now, ask your candidates how they feel, somehow get the information that you need before you fill out the envelope that arrives at your door. Last couple of short snackers. This government believes in talking and consulting. Right now, there are dozens of issues that are out for consultation. So when those all start pouring back in, we're going to start seeing a whole lot of, they're going to have to make some very tough decisions. We just saw a interim report come back on the agricultural land reserve. That matters to you as well. We made a decision, controversial as it was, to have 2 zones in the ALR because there are different circumstances. I dealt with farmers in McBride for years about the kinds of things they needed to be able to do on their land to survive as farmers. And it wasn't about giving up agricultural land. It was about how do you use that land effectively? What little things could you do to help those farmers stay in business? The report recommends the dissolution of the 2 zones. So we're back to 1 giant agricultural land reserve. I believe in preserving agricultural land as well, but I also believe in being able to perpetuate farms in British Columbia. And you have to give farmers some additional tools to be able to do those kinds of things and afford to stay on their farms. That's going to be a critical issue. Consultation is now closed, but you need to be watching the outcomes of that report. But I want to encourage you to go to a place that's called govtogether.bc, and it's really about civic engagement. There are so many consultations underway that we need to have our voices heard. And whatever your view is, you should find ways to go on there about issues that matter to you and participate. And I'm going to end with this one. It's a personal one, and there will be different views in this room, but it matters a lot to me. I was lucky enough to be engaged in the process that brought veterans' license plates to British Columbia. And every time I see a car with a veteran's license plate, I say a little thank you. We managed to, we kept the program evolving, and we included motorcycles because there were some veterans who rode motorcycles and they didn't get a license plate, so we fixed that. And then families came to me, a father in Prince George came to me, and he's a Silver Cross parent because he lost his son in Afghanistan. And he said, you know, I have this idea, and I know other jurisdictions are thinking about it, but could we get a Silver Cross license plate, a special license plate for those of us who have lost our loved ones? So we worked really hard, and I will never forget that day in my life when I got to go with that man from my constituency down to Vancouver, and we launched that license plate. And to him, it was one way of saying thank you for the loss of his son. The government has taken on a consultation at the moment around the future of veterans' license plates. They want to expand the criteria to include other organizations, including first responders and others. Now, I have a first responder in my family, and I care about them deeply. But if you want to create a license plate, then create one for them. Don't diminish the veterans' license plates by adding people who have not had military service. That's out for consultation as we speak. And I hope that even in issues like that, British Columbians will speak up, because if not, when you see the veterans' license plates, there will be no guarantee that that veteran has actually served our country with military service. It may well be an RCMP officer or someone else, and I have the highest regard for them. But then the choice of the government would be to create a new license plate for first responders. But please don't diminish the substantive meaning behind what a veteran's license plate means. So it goes from big issues like electoral reform to that license plate that you see potentially in this parking lot. And you get a chance to have a say. But if we don't participate, those changes will take place around us. And I'll end on this. One of the criticisms of First Past the Post, the current electoral system, is that MLAs are more destined to serve the people that voted for them. Well, I can pretty much guarantee you that there are people in this room that didn't vote for me. But it has never stopped me from answering phone calls, from having you come to my office, from serving you here in Valemount. So please don't let anyone perpetuate the myth that the voting model determines who elected representatives serve. I'm here to serve every person in the Robson Valley. It doesn't matter whether you voted for me or not. And that's one of the myths that's being perpetuated about the potential change to proportional representation. That potentially you could have an NDP and a Liberal or a Green MLA in a riding so that people could pick and choose who serves them. I can tell you this, it doesn't matter who you voted for. My job is to serve the Robson Valley, and I'm going to do that to the best of my ability, whether I'm on the opposition benches or the government side. So thanks for your attention. Those are the issues that I thought of that would have some direct impact on the Robson Valley. But I'm happy to hear your questions or your comments or your feedback as we move forward. And I just want to thank you for the privilege of serving you for, I'm into my 5th term now. And it has been both challenging and exhilarating, and I'm deeply grateful. So thanks for having me this morning. I very much appreciate it. I don't have the answers to your questions. I'm always happy to go look for them. So is there anyone who has a question or a comment?
Is there more? I don't know, this is shameful. I work at the newspaper, so I appreciate your your push to say, let's get informed about electoral reform. I think you're absolutely right. In those three scenarios that are chosen, is there not one where things for rural people, I'm not saying that this, I'm not in any way supporting this, I'm just asking, there's one where for rural people the ridings stay the same size, but down in Victoria, Vancouver, the populated centers, things get crazy there where they have multiple MLAs. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, like sort of part of the province changing, and then rural parts having this what I thought was the same footprint for an MLA, same service area, and still one MLA in a first past the post kind of situation.
Andrew, you're correct. There are three models that will be on the ballot, and you're probably referring to mixed member. So again, I'm not familiar enough with all of the details. Yes, there is a model that looks at a similar footprint, but again, the big concern I have is details about how those MLAs are chosen are unclear. And so there are details related to each of the models that will be determined after the election, after the referendum. And I have enormous concern about that. If people think, and I think it is the government's responsibility, if there are examples of what ridings might look like and how they might be chosen, there should be maps available. There should be details available. And that is the government's responsibility, in my view. So yes, there are models that look at a mix. The one that, from my concern, one of the models, it's called rural-urban. So while there is a sense that that might treat rural communities differently, the definition of rural has not been determined. So let's be clear, Prince George could be considered urban under that model, and I would assume it would be a community of that size, which means in my riding today, under that model, I would have Prince George voting under one system, Valemount and McBride voting under another electoral system. I have no idea how practically that would work. So yes, there are models, and that's why it's important for you guys to, each of you go and take a look. There are models that retain rural riding size. There are models that double the size of ridings, or some size, who knows. There are models that look at retaining a first past the post in part of the province. The point is, it's very complicated, and all of you need to take it very seriously. I personally think that the timing, the process that's led up to where we're at, require more time. And if we're going to have a referendum, then for heaven's sakes, take the time to get it right, make sure people understand it, and then ask them to vote, and make sure you put thresholds in place. Because in the end of the day, Andrew, it might not matter, because our votes, when you add up Vancouver and Victoria, will be a drop in the bucket compared to who will actually decide the future of electoral reform. But an important question and an important perspective, and all the more reason for all of you to figure out what the models mean and what you're going to do. Other questions? Comments even? Well, again, I want to thank you very much for the time. I'll stick around for a while and happy to have conversations in my office door. And I neglected to introduce probably two of the people who are most important in my world. Well, obviously one of them, my husband. He's pretty important. My husband, Bill, who is, we consider our life, the events that we go to are part of the life that we lead together, that we have for 17 years. And I can tell you, well, we've been married just about next year. I think it's 40, isn't it? Oh, good, I got that right. So I'm very appreciative for a family that allows me to do this job and encourages me to do it. I think many of you met my grandsons. We brought them here for Canada Day this year, and we had an absolutely wonderful time. It was really special. So they're a huge part of the job I do. And then I couldn't do my job without Dorothy, who is my senior staff person in my office. She's incredible. She's on her way back from Kamloops. She was at a personal event, and she came by to be here with us this morning. Dorothy, I really appreciate all that you do. And I know that she's the voice you often hear or read in emails, so I want to make sure you see her and know that our office is there to serve all of you. So thanks for having me this morning. It's incredible that you came out on a Monday in August. And we'll be back in and out of the valley, and we're happy to meet with you as necessary. And one last thing. We worked hard to get a seat at the school board table for this region. You need to make sure you find some great school board trustee candidates, because we're going to have our very own seat. And that's going to be critical to the future of rural education, having someone serve at that table specifically for the Robson Valley. So I want to encourage you, those of you who are thinking electorally, make sure we find someone great to run for school trustee. So thanks, have a great week, and I really appreciate your time this morning.